My name is Elena Brooks, and I was 28 when I returned to the one place I had sworn I would never walk into again, my childhood home in Montana. The road leading there hadn't changed, still lined with the same fence posts and pine trees that watched me leave 5 years earlier. I was back for one reason only: to attend my father's leadership event at Pinnacle Defense Systems. What no one in that house knew was that I had not come home as a daughter. I had come back as Colonel Elena Brooks, the Pentagon's primary liaison for a $1.2 billion military contract, the exact contract my father and brother had spent years trying to impress people with. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought they knew what success looked like, dressed in suits and climbing office ladders. They thought I had thrown my life away by joining the military. What they didn't know was that I now outranked most of the men in their boardrooms. I pulled into the driveway just before dusk. The house looked the same, like a preserved relic of misplaced priorities. The porch light flickered weakly, casting familiar shadows across the front steps. I stepped out of the car and gripped the handle of my suitcase with one hand and the weight of unspoken years with the other. In my duffel bag, tucked away beneath folded civilian clothes, was my dress uniform, pressed, polished, and bearing the silver eagle insignia of a full colonel. But tonight I would wear no rank. Tonight I would be the Elena they thought they knew. The front door creaked open before I knocked. "Elena, you made it," my mother, Margaret, called from the kitchen, as if I were just arriving from a grocery run instead of returning from the other side of the world. She didn't come to the door. She never did. Her voice was warm but distant, laced with the same disappointment it had always carried when directed at me. Not like when she said Daniel's name. Not like when she gushed over his latest promotion or investment portfolio. I stepped inside. The air smelled like roasted chicken and lemon polish. Family photos lined the hallway, frozen in time. Daniel's graduation picture had been given a new frame. My own commissioning portrait was nowhere in sight. I traced my fingers along the faded wallpaper, recalling the girl who once lived here. The one who had begged to be seen, who had believed that if she just achieved enough, her parents might finally look at her the way they looked at Daniel. In the kitchen, my mother was chopping vegetables with surgical precision. "Your brother and Sophie will be here soon," she said without turning. "He was just promoted again. Senior project manager. Shannon Chase herself chose him." He nodded. "That's great." The words tasted like cardboard. I had mastered this tone, this neutral politeness. It was safer than the truth. She continued talking about Daniel and Sophie's new house, the wine they were bringing, and how proud Richard, my father, had been when Daniel was put in charge of a new project. She didn't ask what I had been doing. Not about the cybersecurity task force I led in Europe. Not about my recent promotion. Not about the base I now commanded. I retreated to my old bedroom where time had stood still. Cheerleading trophies still gathered dust on the shelf. The bedspread was the same one I had slept under in high school. On the desk, a stack of college brochures still sat, topped by a folded acceptance letter to Stanford's business school. My parents had framed that one. It had been the future they wanted for me, the one I threw away when I joined ROTC and accepted a military scholarship instead. No shadow boxes of rank promotions. No plaques. No headlines from military publications. To them, my service had been a detour, a mistake they were still waiting for me to grow out of. I opened the closet and carefully unzipped the garment bag. The colonel uniform inside shimmered slightly in the dim light. It carried weight, honor, sacrifice, years of dedication, but also silence. I had stopped sending photos home long ago. The last time I invited them to a promotion ceremony, they claimed the flights were too expensive. That same week, Daniel posted a photo from a ski resort with our parents standing beside him. I ran my fingers across the silver eagle insignia on the shoulder. The rank I now held faster than almost anyone in my division's history. I had been promoted to colonel just 3 weeks ago after heading a cyber defense operation that prevented a nationwide data breach. Only one person had been there to pin it on me. General Ava Monroe, my mentor and the only person who had believed in me since the beginning. Not a single member of my family had attended. Tomorrow, Pinnacle Defense Systems would host its annual leadership conference. The CEO, Lauren Chase, would be there in person. The same woman who had placed Daniel at the head of a team that didn't know the Army liaison assigned to the project was his own sister. What they didn't realize was that I would be attending, not as a guest, but as the person in charge of oversight for the entire program. Downstairs, the front door opened again. Daniel's voice echoed through the house like a victory bell. "Mom, we're here." I took a long breath and closed the closet door, leaving the uniform out of sight for now. One more dinner, I thought. One more performance. But tomorrow, I would no longer be their disappointment. Tomorrow, they would learn exactly who I had become. By the time I descended the stairs, the house was filled with voices and the clinking of silverware. Daniel stood at the center of it all, laughing with our cousin Rachel Kim and exchanging inside jokes with our mother Margaret. His wife Sophie sat perfectly poised with a glass of wine in her hand and a subtle smirk that never left her face. My father Richard stood by the fireplace, nodding along as Daniel detailed his latest workplace triumphs with rehearsed humility. "Elena, there you are," Daniel said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did Mom tell you? Shannon Chase picked me to lead the new integration team. It's part of the military contract the company's rolling out. Huge project." He nodded. "Yes," she mentioned. "It's big," he continued, clearly expecting praise. 12 people reporting directly to me, including 2 senior engineers. Not bad, right? "Impressive," I said flatly, resisting the urge to mention that every decision he made on that project would pass through me first. Richard stepped forward. "We're lucky to have Daniel. Shannon doesn't assign leadership like that without confidence. He's really moving fast." He clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "This is the kind of leadership Pinnacle needs." Dinner was served shortly after. Roast chicken, garlic potatoes, and green beans arranged with the same precision my mother had always applied to meals meant to impress. The seating arrangement hadn't changed. Richard at the head, Daniel beside him. I took my usual place at the far end, next to Rachel, who gave me a sympathetic smile. "So, Elena," Sophie said as she passed the salad. "What's new with you? Still stationed in? Where was it last time?" "Louisiana." "Germany," I corrected gently. "I've been in Stuttgart the past year." "Oh," she said with a tight smile. "How nice. Must be hard moving around so much." Rachel chimed in. "It's kind of amazing though. I saw that article about a cyber task force out of Europe. You were involved, right?" Before I could answer, Margaret interrupted. "Rachel, don't bring work into dinner. Let's focus on the family." That was the family in their own words. What Daniel did was work. What I did was something else. Vague, inconvenient, better left unsaid. Daniel leaned in. "Actually, it's funny. We were told someone from the army is coming tomorrow. Some colonel, supposedly. I don't know why they're sending someone that high up. They probably won't even understand half of what we're doing. But Shannon wants to impress them." I took a slow sip of water. "Interesting. Do you know what the colonel's role is?" "No idea," Richard said dismissively. "They probably just sign paperwork and ask broad questions. That's usually how it goes with military oversight." My fork paused midair. "What makes you so sure?" Richard shrugged. "We've worked with defense contracts for years. Military types like structure, but they're not visionaries. They're trained to follow, not lead." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "That doesn't seem fair." Daniel laughed. "Come on, Rachel. You know how it is. Corporate work is the real grind. Military people have government job security, pensions, and chain of command to protect them. I mean, it's respectable, sure. But let's be honest, it's not high-level innovation." I glanced toward the doorway where my garment bag lay upstairs in silence. The colonel he was mocking was sitting across the table from him. And tomorrow he would answer to her. Margaret began discussing Rachel's recent condo purchase, praising her financial savvy and timing in the real estate market. The conversation swirled around investments, bonus structures, vacation plans, and stock options. No one asked me what I'd been working on. No one mentioned the recent cyber attack I had helped neutralize, or the award I had received for operational excellence from European Command. They didn't know, and they didn't care to ask. My father finally turned to me after dessert was served. "So, Elena, you're still a captain? Or is it major now?" "Something like that," I replied with a smile, choosing not to correct him. Rachel blinked. "Wait, Elena, weren't you promoted again?" I met her eyes and gave the slightest nod. "Yes." "To what?" Before I could answer, Margaret spoke over us. "Rachel, don't make her uncomfortable. Not everyone measures success in titles." I nearly choked on the irony. After the dishes were cleared, my family returned to discussing tomorrow's big event. "This meeting is critical for me," Richard said. "It could finally get me to vice president. Shannon will be watching closely." I excused myself soon after and climbed the stairs with mechanical precision. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my bag, pulling out the uniform again. The medals shimmered softly under the bedside lamp. Each one earned through blood, strategy, and sacrifice. Each one ignored. The house had not changed, but I had, and tomorrow they would see it. Not through stories or speeches, but through action, authority, and presence. For once, I wouldn't have to explain who I was. I would simply show them. The morning of the Pinnacle Leadership Conference dawned cold and clear, the Montana sky painted with streaks of rose and steel gray. I was awake before sunrise, already dressed in my uniform as the rest of the house remained silent. The midnight blue of my service coat was flawless, the brass buttons polished until they caught the morning light like stars. The silver eagle insignia on my shoulders gleamed with quiet authority. Downstairs, I could hear the faint rustle of movement as my parents and Daniel prepared to leave. I waited until both cars had pulled out of the driveway before stepping into the cold and locking the door behind me. The drive to Pinnacle Defense Systems was short but intense. Every breath I took seemed to tighten my focus. This wasn't just another assignment or another oversight briefing. This was a reckoning, not out of vengeance but of truth. The world I had built through discipline and resilience was about to intersect, without warning, with the one that had refused to acknowledge it. I pulled into the space labeled Military Liaison Reserved and stepped out. The guards at the gate straightened immediately upon seeing my uniform. "Good morning, Colonel," one of them said respectfully. I returned the greeting and handed over my identification. "Colonel Elena Brooks, Pentagon Liaison for Project Sentinel." His eyes widened slightly as he processed the name and rank. "Yes, ma'am. You're cleared to proceed. Main conference room is on the 3rd floor." "Thank you," I replied and moved forward with precise steps. Inside the building, the energy was different. Eyes followed me. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Executives nodded or stepped aside as I passed. It wasn't just the uniform. It was the authority I carried within it. The elevator opened on the executive floor, revealing Daniel, tablet in hand, standing by the hallway water cooler. His head lifted at the sound of footsteps. His casual glance turned into stunned silence as his gaze landed on my uniform, on the rank, on the name tag that left no room for confusion. "Elena," he said slowly, the color draining from his face. What are you doing here? Why are you in uniform?" I finished for him with a calm voice. "I'm here for the review. I thought I'd attend in person." His eyes fell to my shoulder, where the eagle insignia rested. "Colonel," he nodded. "That's right." Before he could respond, another voice cut in. "Brooks, come on, we're late for the—" My father's words died in his throat as he rounded the corner and saw me. His mouth opened, then shut again. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," I said, nodding politely. "I'm heading into the conference room now. See you inside." I walked past them both, leaving their confusion in my wake. Inside the conference room, preparations were in full swing. Staff members were setting up nameplates and arranging breakfast trays. A young assistant nearly dropped a pitcher when she noticed me. "Oh, Colonel Brooks. We weren't told you'd be here in person." "No worries. Everything looks great. Carry on." I took my seat at the table, right next to the CEO's reserved chair. The nameplate in front of me read, Military Liaison, Colonel Elena Brooks. It was clear. This wasn't just a guest visit. This was command presence. Executives and managers trickled in. Some introduced themselves with polite curiosity, others with overt deference once they saw the uniform. Whispers began to spread like wind through dry leaves. A few glanced at Daniel and Richard as they entered, gauging their reactions. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door opened and in walked Lauren Chase, the CEO of Pinnacle Defense Systems. She was elegant in a tailored navy suit, her stride sharp, her gaze sweeping the room like a battlefield general. When her eyes met mine, she stopped. "Well," she said with a grin. "This is a surprise." Understood. "Good morning, Ms. Chase. I thought we were doing a virtual today." "I happened to be in town visiting family," I replied smoothly. "Figured I'd attend in person." "I'm glad you did. Everyone, this is Colonel Elena Brooks, the Pentagon's lead liaison on Project Sentinel. She holds full approval authority on all military-facing aspects of our development pipeline." The room stilled. From across the table, I saw Richard's expression collapse into stunned disbelief. Daniel looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Lauren continued, her voice steady. "Colonel Brooks is one of the youngest Cyber Command colonels in the Army. Her background includes oversight of several high-stakes defense operations. She's the reason this contract was awarded to Pinnacle." Several people turned their heads sharply, realizing the gravity of the introduction. I nodded politely and sat down, looking forward to the discussion. Lauren opened the session with project briefings. Department heads presented their progress. When technical concerns came up, she often deferred to me, and I responded with clear, concise authority. I cited regulations, performance metrics, security thresholds. No one challenged me, not because of my rank but because I knew exactly what I was talking about. When Daniel's turn came, his usual confidence was absent. His voice wavered slightly as he stood before the screen. I'll be presenting the new user interface models for Sentinel integration. The system prioritizes efficiency for field operations and..." He hesitated as his eyes flicked to mine. I gave him a nod. "Please continue, Mr. Brooks." He stumbled through the presentation. His proposal lacked redundancy testing. The interface posed vulnerabilities in active deployment. When he finished, I cleared my throat. "Thank you for your presentation. Few observations, if I may. First, the design assumes consistent bandwidth across all use environments. That's a critical oversight given field variability. Second, there's no built-in authentication trigger beyond initial login. That's a risk for real-time encryption breach. Finally, your current update cycle does not meet secure push protocol." The room was silent. Daniel stood frozen. "These are not flaws in effort," I added professionally. "They're common missteps. But they need to be addressed before I can sign off on this phase. Please submit revised plans by Friday." Across the table, Richard looked pale. He had just watched his son be corrected, publicly, by the daughter he had dismissed for years. Lauren nodded approvingly. "Excellent points, Colonel Brooks. Everyone take note. These are the standards we must meet." The room moved on. But the balance of power had shifted. And my family knew it. The meeting lasted another 2 hours, but after Daniel's presentation, the atmosphere had shifted. Executives and engineers no longer looked to Richard Brooks or his son for cues. They looked to me. The person they had assumed would be a distant government representative on the other side of a screen was instead sitting among them, fluently navigating both the military and technical demands of the contract they were building their reputations on. As the final reports were delivered, Lauren Chase closed her tablet and stood. "Before we break, I want to recognize the tremendous opportunity we have working with Colonel Brooks. Her insight has already shaped much of Project Sentinel's core structure, and her continued involvement will define its success. Colonel, thank you for your presence today, and for your leadership. There was a short round of respectful applause. I nodded in appreciation. Across the room, Richard looked as if he'd swallowed a mouthful of gravel. Daniel refused to meet my eyes. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The facts had spoken louder than any emotional speech ever could. As the room emptied, Lauren approached me directly. Colonel, I have to admit, I had no idea you were related to Richard. I gave her a polite smile. Neither did he. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Well, that certainly explains the look on his face during your analysis of Daniel's module. I came here to do my job, I said evenly. Nothing more. And you did it flawlessly. She leaned in. I'll say this much. Your presence has given this team a much-needed wake-up call. She turned to rejoin her executives, but not before calling over the Senior Vice President of Engineering, Charles Bennett, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes. Charles, meet Colonel Brooks. She's the one behind the quantum threat response paper I sent you last month. His face lit up with recognition. You're that Colonel Brooks. Guilty, I replied. That paper was brilliant. We've already implemented 2 of your countermeasure frameworks. It's ahead of its time. Glad to hear it, I said. Adaptation is our best defense these days. Charles nodded appreciatively and shook my hand. It's an honor. The interaction was short, professional, but it cut through decades of silence. Just a few feet away, my father stood at the edge of the room, watching the conversation with hollow eyes. He wasn't used to being the person on the outside looking in. For the first time, he wasn't the one with the powerful handshake. He wasn't the one being introduced. His daughter was. Lauren turned to him next. Richard, you never told me your daughter was the Colonel Brooks. He cleared his throat, flustered. I didn't realize. Until today. Lauren looked back at me. That's surprising, considering she's the final authority on our contract. There was no malice in her tone, just cold curiosity, the kind that left no room for excuses. Daniel, standing nearby, looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Wait. So you've had final approval this whole time? For the last 6 months, I said calmly. Since my promotion. His face blanched. I had no idea, he said, more to himself than to me. I thought you were still. I raised an eyebrow. Still what? Pushing paper somewhere. Training maybe. I didn't think you were. Running point on the most critical cybersecurity operation in the department. I finished for him. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Lauren stepped between us, glancing at both brothers with narrowed eyes. Daniel, Richard, perhaps we should give the Colonel a moment. I imagine this is already enough of a shock. My father stepped closer. Elena, he began, his voice awkward and unsure. We should talk. 11 o'clock, I said, glancing at my watch. Your office. He nodded. 'Twas automatic. He was used to scheduling meetings with people who outranked him. The executives slowly filtered out. But the damage was done. The whisper had spread. Asterisk Richard Brooks' daughter is the colonel in charge. Asterisk not the intern. Not the junior analyst. The colonel. As I stepped out of the conference room, I could hear the faint murmur of conversations behind me. I heard she refused to use her family name, someone whispered. Did it all on merit, another replied. That part was true. I had built every inch of my rank without using my family's influence, because I had never been offered any. And now, ironically, the very people who once treated my career like a disappointment were seeing it in full light, whether they were ready or not. At 11 a.m. sharp, I knocked on the frosted glass door of Richard's office. Inside I could see 3 figures, Richard, Daniel, and my mother, Margaret, who had clearly been called in for damage control. The moment I stepped in, the temperature of the room changed. Elena, my father said carefully. Thank you for coming. I scheduled the meeting, I reminded him. But you're welcome. I stayed standing. I didn't know how high you had risen, he said after a pause. I didn't realize what you'd become. You didn't want to know, I said. There's a difference. Daniel looked away. Margaret twisted her hands in her lap. I sent invitations, I continued, to every promotion call. I emailed links when articles were published. You ignored them all. We didn't understand, my mother said quietly. You thought I was wasting my life, I finished. That I was running from real success. That military work was a safety net for people who couldn't hack it in the corporate world. I folded my arms behind my back in parade rest. You were wrong. Another silence. Daniel broke it. I didn't mean to insult you last night. I didn't know who you were. You never asked, I said without anger. And I stopped offering. My father looked up. You've done well. Better than we ever imagined. Better than you ever cared to imagine, I corrected. My mother blinked rapidly. We didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I replied. For years. Richard stood and approached. Elena. Colonel Brooks. I owe you an apology. I met his eyes. I underestimated you, he said, his voice low. Dismissed you. I was wrong. He extended his hand. It was stiff and formal but real. Took it. Thank you, I said. Margaret stood as well. We should have been there for you. We should have known better. Even Daniel looked remorseful. I guess I always thought you gave up on the plan. I didn't realize you were building something better. I wasn't trying to win, I said simply. I was trying to serve. And for the first time they listened. Not because I demanded their respect, but because I had already earned it. The hours after the confrontation passed slowly. I stayed at the facility, meeting with the internal security team and reviewing system audits for Project Sentinel. No one questioned my presence now. If anything, they went out of their way to ensure I had every file, every access point, every answer I needed. The title had spoken for itself, but the execution had secured it. By the time I returned to the house, the mood had shifted. My mother, Margaret, was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the familiar clatter of pots and knives a strange echo of my childhood. But she wasn't humming, and she didn't speak until I entered the room. I thought I'd make your favorite tonight, she said, placing a roast into the oven. Lemon herb chicken. You always asked for it before a test. I nodded slowly. Thank you. I never knew what the medals meant, she added softly. The ones in your box upstairs. I thought they were just decorative. They're not, I said. I know that now, she replied. I read about them. Each one has a story, doesn't it? Yes. She hesitated before turning. Will you tell us those stories? Tonight. The question wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. And I accepted it. That evening, my family gathered at the dinner table once again. But this time there was no boasting, no comparisons, no dismissive laughter. It was quiet at first, unsure. My father, Richard, passed the bread without a lecture. Daniel poured wine for everyone, his eyes downcast. Sophie wasn't present, work, she claimed, though the truth was likely discomfort. I read your interview, Daniel said eventually. The one in Defense Tech Journal. You found that. It wasn't hard, he replied. I just never thought to look before. I sipped my water. It's not exactly bedtime reading. He chuckled weakly. No, but it was impressive. You talked about quantum security frameworks and behavioral firewall patterns like they were poetry. That's generous, I said. He looked at me then really looked. I was wrong. I thought I was ahead of you. But you weren't playing the same game. I wasn't trying to, I replied. Dinner continued with cautious conversation. They asked questions. They listened. For once, they didn't try to reshape my answers to fit their understanding. When I described the months I spent coordinating cyber response across 3 continents, my father didn't interrupt. When I explained the weight of leading soldiers, not just operations but lives, My mother touched my arm gently and said, "We should have asked sooner." I stopped offering, I reminded them. But maybe that was my fault too. "No," my father said. "We made you feel like your choices were wrong. That's on us." As dessert was served, apple crisp, another childhood favorite, a knock came at the door. I stood to answer it. On the porch stood General Ava Monroe, her posture still razor straight, her expression warm. "Permission to enter, Colonel," she said with a faint grin. I laughed. Always. I had invited Ava not just because she was in town for Pentagon briefings, but because I wanted my family to meet the woman who had seen what they hadn't, who had filled the role of mentor, supporter, even stand-in mother when mine had been silent. Everyone rose from the table as she entered. "General," Richard said, extending his hand quickly, "thank you for joining us." "The honor's mine," she replied. "Any family brave enough to raise someone like Elena deserves my respect." My mother blushed slightly. "We're just beginning to understand what she's become." "She was always that person," Ava said. "She just had to grow into the space to show it." We all sat again, this time with Ava at the head of the table. As she shared stories about training exercises, high-pressure simulations, and missions that skirted the edge of catastrophe, my family's world widened. They heard about the time I stayed up for 32 hours straight to restore a compromised comms grid during a blackout in Eastern Europe, or the moment I had to make a judgment call that protected thousands of files, even at the cost of a planned operation. And how those decisions weren't just technical, they were moral. "You don't just train soldiers," Ava explained. "You train minds. You train integrity. Elena's specialty isn't code. It's leadership." Daniel listened with his hand on his chin, visibly shaken. My father looked over the dining room at the wall where only Daniel's achievements were framed. His eyes lingered there for a long moment. After dinner, as the dishes were cleared and coffee brewed, he pulled something from his briefcase, a framed copy of the Sentinel article, the one with me, Ava, and Lauren standing beside a display of encrypted models. "I had this done this morning," he said, placing it gently on the table. "I wanted you to have a copy for your wall. If you want it." Took it. The article's headline was sharp and confident. "Colonel Elena Brooks redefines cyber warfare strategy." "Thank you," I said quietly. He sat down with a sigh. "I should have been proud sooner." "You can start now," I said. "I plan to," he replied. As night settled and Ava bid us good night, my family remained seated together, still talking. The air had changed. There was weight, yes, regret, but also something lighter. Respect. Earned the hard way but real. I looked around at the people I had once stopped trying to reach and realized something simple but profound. They finally saw me, not as the girl who chose the wrong path, but as the woman who carved her own. 6 months later, I stood at the large window of my Washington, D.C. apartment, looking out over the Potomac River as the lights of the city shimmered against the darkening sky. My uniform hung neatly in the closet, but tonight wasn't about military precision. It was about family, and how that word had begun to change. The past few months had brought more than professional milestones. They had brought an uneasy but welcome recalibration with the people I had once distanced myself from. My mother called more often now, sometimes just to ask how my day went. My father sent clippings of articles he thought I'd appreciate, underlining quotes in red pen like he used to do when reviewing Daniel's business reports. And Daniel. He had started forwarding my published briefings to his team and had asked, without sarcasm or ego, if I'd review one of his technical proposals. It was progress. Awkward, imperfect, but real. That night, they were all coming to dinner. The doorbell rang just as I was placing the final dish on the table. Rosemary chicken with garlic mashed potatoes and sautéed spinach. The wine glasses were already set. The candles flickered with warmth that didn't feel staged. I opened the door to find my father first. He held a long, flat box wrapped in brown paper and string. "For your wall," he said simply. Inside was a custom frame holding my original commission certificate, now restored and preserved alongside a series of my service ribbons and my most recent commendation medal. "You tracked this down?" asked, touched. "Your mother helped. We called your old unit." Before I could respond, Margaret appeared behind him, holding a warm pie tin in both hands. "Apple crisp," she said with a soft smile. "Not from a recipe card. I actually called your old roommate from Stuttgart to ask how you liked it made." That made me smile. "I didn't know you still had her number." "I didn't," she admitted. "But I found her on LinkedIn." Daniel and Sophie arrived next. This time, Sophie wasn't dressed to impress. She wore jeans and a cable-knit sweater, and brought a bottle of wine that wasn't absurdly expensive. Daniel came in carrying a box of pastries from a bakery 2 blocks down. "You've got one hell of a neighborhood," he said, whistling as he looked around my apartment. "This place is incredible." "It's not Montana," I said. "No," he replied. "It's better." We gathered around the table and ate without formality. No one jockeyed for attention. No one asked who was more successful. We talked about travel, a new Pentagon cybersecurity initiative I'd been tapped to consult on, and Daniel's growing interest in user behavior modeling, an area I had written on early in my career. "I read your paper on deception matrices," he said, sipping his wine. "It changed how I designed our newest interface. Honestly, my team thinks I'm some kind of genius now." I raised an eyebrow. "And did you give credit where it was due?" He grinned. "Eventually." We both laughed. It was light. Not the tight laughter of forced family interactions, but something easier, truer. After dinner, as the last plates were cleared and everyone settled into the living room, my father walked over to my bookshelf. It held a balance of framed photos, military memorabilia, and hardcover editions of the publications I'd contributed to over the years. He stopped at a shadow box containing the medal from Operation Daggerpoint, the mission that had cemented my promotion. "You were there during that cyber breach," he said quietly. "I remember hearing about it on the news. Didn't realize you were behind the scenes." "I wasn't behind the scenes," I said. "I was the lead." He looked over at me. "I'm starting to realize how little I knew." "You weren't interested," I said gently. "But you are now." "Yes," he said. "I am now." I didn't need him to say more. Sometimes change doesn't come with speeches. Sometimes it's just in the way someone stands a little longer at your shelf, or asks the kind of question they never would have thought to ask before. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find General Ava Monroe, off duty tonight, dressed in civilian clothes, a bottle of bourbon tucked under one arm. "Permission to enter, Colonel," she said with a wink. "You're always welcome," I replied, stepping aside. My father stood as she entered, offering his hand with firm respect. "General Monroe," he said. "You were right." She tilted her head. "About what?" She didn't grow into greatness. She always had it. The room quieted as we gathered once again at the table, now for coffee and pie. My mother served Ava like she was a visiting dignitary. Daniel listened closely as Ava shared anecdotes about some of my more classified exploits, cleverly avoiding anything too sensitive while painting a picture of someone they were just beginning to see clearly. "Natalie, I mean Elena," my mother corrected herself, laughing nervously, "was always so driven. We just didn't understand what she was aiming for." "You didn't have to," Ava said gently. "You just had to trust that she would land exactly where she belonged." Later, as we said our goodbyes and everyone filtered out, my father paused by the door. "You know," he said, "I used to think titles didn't matter, that all that rank and protocol stuff was just noise. But today I realized something." "What's that?" "It's not the title that commands respect. It's what someone does to earn it." He shook my hand again. "You earned all of it. And I'm proud." When they were gone, I stood in the quiet of my home, the framed article resting on the shelf, the crisp scent of apple pie lingering in the air, and the ghost of old disappointments finally fading. They had seen me, really seen me, and I had remained myself all along. The apartment was silent again, save for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of city life below. I stood at the window, watching as tail lights traced red lines across the bridges stretching over the Potomac. DC at night always felt different than any other city I had known. Steady, alive, heavy with purpose. Much like the life I had built here. The dinner had gone better than I could have predicted. No one had tried to erase the past or pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, they'd acknowledged it in small, honest ways. That was all I ever wanted. Not a perfect apology or a ceremonial turnaround, just the truth spoken out loud. I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up the frame my father had given me. The certificate was old but dignified, and now preserved with the same care he once reserved only for Daniel's diplomas. My fingers brushed the glass as I remembered the day it was signed, the weight of the commission in my hands, and the loneliness that followed when no one at home had answered the call I placed afterward. They had always imagined success looked one way. Sharp suits, corner offices, stock portfolios. My version had never fit their mold. And because they couldn't recognize it, they'd pretended it didn't count. But it did. Every late night in front of a blinking terminal. Every soldier I had trained. Every system I had kept safe. It had all counted. There were moments I had doubted myself. Nights on deployment when the silence pressed in too hard. When I watched others receive praise for doing less because they fit better into the boxes people understood. I had wondered if I would always be invisible to the people who were supposed to see me first. But now they knew. It wasn't just about being a colonel or overseeing $1 billion contract. It wasn't about outshining anyone. It was about finally being seen as legitimate, as worthy, without needing to translate my identity into something they already respected. They respected me because I didn't change to fit them. The next morning I met Ava at a cafe a few blocks from the Pentagon. She was early as usual, already halfway through a croissant. "You survived dinner," she said without looking up from her tablet. "Barely," I replied with a smirk. "You didn't tell me you'd show up with bourbon." It felt appropriate. "I think my father wants to invite you to Thanksgiving now." "Not if I can help it," she muttered, making me laugh. She finally looked up, studying me for a moment. "So, what happens next?" I stirred my coffee. "I move forward. Keep leading. Keep building. Nothing changes. Except everything has," she said. He nodded. "Your family sees you now. They might never fully understand what you've done, but they respect who you are. That matters." "It does." She leaned back. "And not because they said so, but because you earned it long before they arrived at the truth." The weight of those words settled into me like armor I no longer needed to carry. That afternoon, I returned to base for a final strategy session with my cyber operations team. We reviewed new developments, ran through simulations, and updated threat responses. My name appeared on dozens of memos, briefings, and encrypted channels. No one questioned it. Here I was simply Colonel Brooks, known, trusted, and followed. But I no longer needed the uniform to prove that to anyone. Later, as I walked the halls of the operations center, a young lieutenant stepped into line beside me. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I read your Sentinel debrief last week. It was different. Felt like someone had actually been there." "I was there," I said. She smiled. "Makes sense. We talk about you in our unit. The way you handled that breach. It's kind of legendary." I looked over at her, bright-eyed, determined the way I once was. "Don't chase legends," I told her. "Just do the work. The right people will notice." She nodded, thoughtful before falling behind again. Back in my office, the blinds filtered the light across the wall of certificates, medals, and letters of commendation. They were neatly arranged, not to impress, but to remind me of every mission, every doubt, every moment I stood when others expected me to fall. I sat at my desk and exhaled. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. The victory wasn't in the meeting room or the dinner table. It wasn't in a promotion or a salute. It was here, in the peace of knowing I had never needed their permission to become everything I already was. I had only needed time, and the courage to walk my own path until they couldn't ignore it anymore. And they hadn't. They saw me now, not because I demanded it, but because I had already become undeniable.